The Yi Dynasty, also known as Choson Dynasty, lasted from 1392 to 1910, more than 5 centuries, one of the longest and most significant periods of Korean history. It is during the Yi or Choson dynasty that Confucianism, or to be specific, New Confucianism, that developed in China during the Song dynasty, became the defining feature of Korean state and a civilization. It was during the Yi dynasty that New Confucianism, as a state ideology and instrument for the management of state and society, gained the position of predominance. It was also in the Yi dynasty that those cultural elements, institutions that were uniquely Korean got further developed. So when we talk about the consolidation of Korean cultural and ethnic identity during the Yi dynasty, these are the two issues that we would like to focus on in our discussion of Korean history of this period of time. The consolidation of New Confucianism and its influence in Korea, and the further development of native cultural institutions, elements, and practices. And that is what we are going to do in today's class section. We are going to discuss the consolidation of Korean cultural and ethnic identity based on something that had been learned from China, New Confucianism, as well as on the native cultural institutions, ideas, practices, and tenets. First, we would like to touch upon the historical background against which the Yi dynasty was founded towards the end of the 14th century and consolidated its rule over Korean peninsula between the end of the 13th century and the beginning of the 14th century. That discussion of historical background must begin with Mongol rule and the impacts of Mongol rule on Korea between the first half of the 13th century and the second half of the 14th century. As we discussed earlier, after having conquered China and after having incorporated China into the expanding Mongol Empire, the Mongol military forces under the leadership of Kublai Khan increased the military as well as political pressure upon the Korean state, or upon Koryo Dynasty, the state that governed Korea up to the end of the 14th century. Although, as we discussed earlier, Koryo Dynasty and its military forces put up a very decisive and determined resistance to the Mongol conquest, the state was too small, and the resources for this state were just too limited in comparison to the massive Mongol Empire and its resources. So in the second half of the 13th century, to survive and to give the civilization an opportunity to survive, the Koryo dynasty surrendered to the Mongol Empire and submitted itself to the Mongol military might and political influence. Once again, that occurred in 1260. In that year, the Koryo dynasty stopped its military resistance to the Mongol Empire, because continuing such resistance would cause further damage to the state, society, and civilization. Unlike China, that was placed under the direct control of Mongol Empire and rulers, Kublai Khan was the ruler of China at the time. Korea was never officially incorporated into the Mongol Empire, meaning that the Koryo state, the Koryo dynasty, was allowed to continue its nominal rule over a Korean peninsula. And that indirect Mongol rule in Korea lasted from 1260 to 1351. It was during this period of time that Korea and its Koryo Dynasty was made a tool to serve the goals and the purposes of a Mongol Empire, and that greatly impacted Korea as a state, society, and a civilization. First, under the indirect rule of Mongol conquerors in Korea, Korea was made a springboard for the Mongol conquerors in their attempt to conquer another part of East Asia, the only remaining independent region in East Asia, the Japanese archipelago. As we know quite well, after successfully conquering China, Kublai Khan and his central government established several branch offices all of China to be the political and administrative as well as military centers for the governing of this massive state and massive empire. After having completed the conquest of Korea, a similar branch office was established in Korean Peninsula in 1279. As many of us can recall, that was also the moment, 1279, when the Song Dynasty or the Southern Song Dynasty was conquered by Kublai Khan and his military forces. This particular branch office that was established in Korea would serve one purpose. The main purpose of that office was to mobilize the resources and human resources in Korea to serve this goal of Kublai Khan and his empire, conquer Japan and incorporate Japan into the Mongol Empire. So the name for that branch office was Branch Secretariat for Chastisement of Japan. Between the time when this branch office was established at the time when Kublai Khan died towards the end of the 13th century, the Koryo Dynasty and the Korean state was required to make dramatic contribution to the Mongol attempts or efforts to conquer the Japanese archipelago, the conquest that had never succeeded. Here is a map of a Mongol Empire. As we can see from this map, by the middle part of the 13th century, Korea, part of East Asia, had been incorporated into the Mongol Empire, a massive empire that covered many regions in Eurasian continent, including Eastern European regions. Although the rule of Mongol in Korea was not a direct one, the Korean state and society had been mobilized during the indirect rule by the Mongols to serve that particular purpose of Mongol Empire, the conquest of a Japanese archipelago. This greatly impacted the Korean state, society, and the evolution of a Korean civilization. From the perspective of the Korean historians, in most cases this impact was quite negative. For example, during this period of time, being required to contribute to Mongol efforts to conquer the Japanese archipelago, the Korean state suffered dramatic economic setback. Valuable economic resources were mobilized to support the Mongol efforts to conquer Japan. As we know quite well, Kublai Khan made two attempts to conquer Japan in his lifetime, and both attempts were defeated by the determined Japanese defenders, the samurai defenders. And as we know also quite well, the defense was assisted by the secret wind kamikaze that destroyed the massive armada of Kublai Khan. While the Mongols had suffered dramatically. In these two defeats, the Chinese and the Korean also suffered because most of the military forces that were used by Kublai Khan to invade Japan twice came from a Korean population as well as the Chinese population. So such a military defeats led to the loss of population in Korea and the economic setbacks in other forms to Korean state. But scholars of Korean society also emphasize the more positive impact of Mongol control over Korea during this 1 century from the middle part of the 13th century to the middle part of the 14th century. And that positive impact could be reflected in the introduction and then consolidation of one particular cultural influence from China that now became a part of the Mongol Empire. And that cultural influence was a new Confucianism. According to those scholars in Korea and in the rest of the world, it was during the Mongol indirect rule over Korea that new Confucianism was introduced into Korea, and after that Mongol rule was over, the Confucian scholars in Korea or the aristocracy in Korea digested what had been learned during the time of Mongol control and make it a part of Korean state ideology and a governmental instrument. And that is something that has been regarded as another impact of the Mongol control over Korea during that 1 century.